Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Lisa Redamozo with Nosotros Education Center. Thank you for joining us. We are going to be talking about the APR for EOC. With me today is the fabulous Lourdes Maria de Zavala. She's joined us from Colorado. I'm coming to you from outside of Dallas, north of Dallas. We're so excited that you can join us today. Before we get into the actual webinar on the APR for EOC, wanted to remind everybody about our free services that we have. In addition to this free webinar, which the recording will be available on our YouTube channel within 24 hours. Don't forget, everyone out there with EOC, that we are getting together on Mondays, every Monday for free. You register once and you'll get an invitation for every Monday at 12 p.m. Central, so we can talk about anything and everything about the competition. So please join us. Also, those have been recorded for almost, since last spring, I believe we started doing them. So on our YouTube channel, just go to Nosotros Education Center. You will see a playlist. So if you want to catch up on all the stuff we've been talking about and join us on Mondays, that would be great. If you can't make it, every session will be recorded. These are free of charge, okay? The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and again, I'm on my webpage right now. I believe you can see this, right? We have our TRIO APR technical assistance. So if y'all need additional assistance, maybe you're coming on board new, or maybe you've been there, but this is new to you. And in fact, Donna, if you don't mind, so that Lourdes can get a heads up, can you launch the dual poll I think we have about asking folks about whether it's their first time working on the APR and what system they use? That'll be great. While I tell everyone else about these services that we have available under professional development, they are an allowable cost. If you all need additional one-on-one assistance through a series of appointments, an hour, 2 hours at a time to get you through the APR, answer any specific questions, we're here to help you with that. So letting you know about that. In addition to, well, here's an SSS webinar that we have coming up in case you're also involved with SSS. This one is professional development. There is a charge for this. We're talking about the SSS CPPs that are in effect now for the first year of the new funding cycle. We have some new CPPs, so we wanted to talk about that. And before I turn it over to Lourdes, I wanted to remind everybody we do have our EOC and talent search proposal writing courses. These courses are not an allowable cost because they're dealing with proposal development, but we have a total of 10 hours of instruction for EOC and also talent search that Lourdes played a big part in as well. That's available for you all to purchase and also to follow along at your demand, at your scheduling availability. And you might have to do it on weekends or evenings, because you don't want to work on it during grant time. So that's another option there. And if you want to check out how those courses work, we are offering and providing free of charge access to a 90-minute TRIO umbrella regulations WIC course as a way for y'all to get used to using the system. And if you like what you see and how it runs with quizzes at the very end of every session, this one would have a quiz and also things, a little to-do list. If you like that format, then you might want to consider purchasing the other 7 sessions that go along for every TRIO program. All right. And as always, we have our additional services that are allowable for every TRIO program individually or in a packet or a la carte. And you can check us out here when you get a chance. But I wanted to go ahead and first, looks like we have 48% split. Someone have done it before the APR. And we have a large percentage of folks using Blumen, but we do have some other folks using some of the other database programs, I believe. And I'm going to turn over to you, my dear Lourdes, to take over. I don't want to take too much of your time, except letting you all know that if you have any questions regarding the APR, please put them in the Q&A, because we're going to publish a spreadsheet that has Q&A, and I'm going to be answering as many as I can while Lourdes is presenting. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Lourdes. Thank you so much for joining us and helping us out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm so excited to be joining you and Donna and Leah in presenting this webinar and getting ready for the EOC annual performance report. As many of you know, we're kind of, still waiting to hear. And so I'm excited that, to be helping you all get ready. We have a little bit of time. And for those of you who have and are know me, I've been in the TRIO world for a really long time. I think I first submitted my first EOC annual performance report in 1991. And so, I've been doing this for a really long time, and I'm really happy to, to get you all ready for this APR. And especially after seeing the results. Wow, Lisa, 52% of folks, this is their first time submitting the EOC. So definitely make sure that you're asking us questions. I'll be happy to, respond to anything, really help you get ready. One thing that, that we wanted to share with you is that, as we begin thinking about this APR, there's not going to be any real changes to the APR because, we haven't had, any changes in the Higher Education Act. We're currently, in this new process with the new administration. We might see one minor change, and I'll go ahead and reflect on that when we get to that point. But other than that, we shouldn't see any changes. So for those of you who are joining us and did submit last year, you're pretty much set. There are a few things that we want to make sure that you're prepared for as this APR webinar process opens up in the web portal, because there's a few hiccups, and again, those are all related to our current shutdown and when the administration will open up the Department of Education home site to update us when this APR is going to be submitted. So a lot of this new experience, even though I've been doing this since 1991 for EOC programs, is that this, wait and stand still and just waiting to get access to it is, I think, sometimes a new experience, but sometimes pretty common. They're trying to juggle that calendar for when APRs will go through. But one thing we can anticipate is that EOC, along with anybody who is joining us that might also be talent search, is that we're probably going to be first up to get our APRs in. So that will be nice. The other part of that is that most of the information that we need to get this APR done is already available. So we need to focus on really getting that APR done and then just kind of sitting back and waiting for the APR website to go live. So that's kind of the position where I'm at, just kind of waiting and seeing what we hear. Some things that are going to be very important about the APR for this year is that this is a prior experience year. So as we're preparing this APR, we need to understand that anything that we present in this web portal that we're going to use to submit our APR is that we have a good understanding for that the report that's going to be provided for us is going to indicate this is the prior experience points you've earned. This is the last year out of the 3 years from this grant cycle that will have an opportunity to earn prior experience points. So again, we have time. We'll update our data. We'll go ahead and spend some time in ensuring that we've earned those valuable prior experience points. Some things that will stay the same is that we'll continue to use the trio.ed.gov website and that portal to go ahead and submit our APR. If you currently go out to that website, it indicates that the date of submission is TBD. Up until last week, it did provide us a date and said October 29th it would go live and it would be due December 4th. But since then, it's now been updated and indicates TBD. And again, because we're waiting for the government shutdown to end and for the contractor who maintains this particular APR web portal is going to, work with Department of Ed and then let us know about those dates. So some things, however, that will be important for you to do prior to the APR website going live is, first of all, assess who is the director. Is the director someone that has already been approved by the Department of Education? If not, you're going to have to wait till the department is back and they're able to provide permissions for the new director to gain access to the APR web portal. Still work on your data, but we will have to wait in those instances to identify a new director and ensure that the department provides the necessary approvals for the new director and that this is updated in the database that the contractors use in order to allow individuals to have access to the APR website. This is also a similar situation for the certifying official. When the APR website goes live, you will have to acknowledge that who the individual is that is your certifying official. If it's your prior and you're a continuing project and you're not a new director, then you can go ahead and pretty much go through the APR submission process. However, if you have a change in the certifying official, you will also need to ensure that you complete a form online that requests for a new certifying official to be approved by the department. And the certifying official is critical to having that role completed because your APR is not submitted until you have two different individuals, the director and the certifying official, approve the submission of your APR. So those are a couple of things that might provide some possible delays in submitting your APR. Some other things that you might want to consider is who is the data entry person if you have someone on staff who's going to assist the director. The data entry user also has to have permissions set up once the APR website goes live. So the unfortunate part, again, is that we're going to have to wait until the APR goes live before we can complete any of those processes. I know that provides a little bit of, angst for some of us who are waiting to approve new individuals, because again, there's not going to be an opportunity to do that. So we'll focus on the things that we can do, and that's getting our APR ready, and then jumping onto the APR website once it does go live. Some things that will continue to happen is that each of these individuals, the director, the certifying official, and the data entry user, all have to have a login.gov account. And so if you're also new, you may want to go ahead and spend a little bit of time creating that login profile. This login profile will allow you to not only create your login account, but also set up your dual factor process in order to be able to authenticate who is logging into the APR website. So spend a little bit of time doing those things, and then we'll sit back and wait once our APR is completed, our data, to get the APR submitted. So those are some things that are going to be really important for you to do. Let me go ahead and just kind of slide down here in this presentation. You'll notice that here we have the website, the trio.ed.gov. And again, this is the web portal that will be used. And here's where I'm indicating that the TBD, it's been updated most recently to indicate this is to be determined. And you'll notice that all of the APRs are closed. So even though you may have the opportunity to click on login and get into the APR website, nothing is live. And you won't be able to even access anything until these dates go live. You'll notice that everybody starts the APR submission at trio.ed.gov, and then you'll click on the login. This will forward you to the login.gov, where you will go ahead and enter your profile, your credentials, and then you'll authenticate, and then you'll arrive at the APR website. When you do log into the Educational Opportunity Center Annual Performance Report website, there's going to be 4 different tabs. Those different tabs allow you to navigate through the APR submission process. But essentially, there's going to be 4 sections, as there are 4 sections to the EOC Annual Performance Report. The first section, and we're going to preview each of those as we go through this form that you're going to be provided with. And Lisa's going to give you a link to where these materials are so that you could review them. When you do log in, the first section is the project identification, certification, and warning. There will be a web form where you enter the information that is found on this particular site. You'll notice that some of the information is pre-populated because once you have created your login credentials, it's already acknowledged that who the grantee is, the address, and director information. You'll also have an opportunity to, in this web portal form, identify who is the data entry person. If you do not have a data entry person, then the director should go ahead and enter their information, as it is a required field. Individuals that are identified here, the director, the data entry person, and the certifying official will all receive email messages based on their profiles in this APR submission process and be able to acknowledge and follow where they are at with respect to this APR submission. You'll also notice that the certification and warning includes a document that, even though we're looking at it here as a paper form, it is going to require a signature. However, the signature is not provided in a paper format as presented here. The director and the certifying official provide a digital signature. And this is why that digital signature and the access to the APR portal is important, and why that needs to be completed once the APR website goes live. Because you want to be able to ensure that any individual that needs to gain access to the web portal has the necessary permissions. Once the director has submitted the annual performance report, and we'll get to that after we've looked at all of these sections. But once the director submits the annual performance report, the director will acknowledge and certify that the information that's included in this report is accurate and completed to the best of their knowledge. They'll also acknowledge that the information that is being presented in the annual performance report is readily verifiable, meaning that if you're ever audited, then they can come and they can look at those records, as you've indicated that all of the documentation is within your files and readily verifiable. The other thing that you are attesting to in this certification is the warning that you know that if you knowingly make a false statement or misrepresentation of the details or the outcomes that are presented within the annual performance report, that you are subject to penalties that might include some fines, imprisonment, or both. So those are some things that are being acknowledged through the digital signature that is provided at the final conclusion of the APR submission process. Here, it's simply being presented as a form. When you continue into the annual performance report, you'll see that section 2 is a demographic profile. In this annual performance report, we are not providing any type of narrative. We're simply describing via numbers whether we met our number funded to serve, whether we are in compliance with respect to meeting the 2/3 low income and first generation students, and whether we met our goals and objectives. So everything is presented in numbers. Okay. There is really no area other than a short and a brief narrative where we respond to the competitive preference priorities. But other than that, everything is presented on numbers. You'll notice in section 2, they're asking about the profile of our project participants, our target schools, and the priorities. We don't have invitational priorities. However, we do have competitive preference priorities that we wrote for, and that the majority of us, in order to get funded, wrote for in the last competition. So in section 2, in part A, we're telling the department whether we met the number funded to serve. If we meet the number funded to serve, meaning we serve 100% of those numbers, then we will earn some prior experience points. And you'll notice here on this particular view that, and let me go ahead and Lisa, let me go ahead and just also zoom in a little bit here. You'll notice that if you meet the total number, you will earn 3 prior experience points. What is important to note also with respect to prior experience points is that In order to earn all 3 points, you have to serve 100% of your numbers. If, however, you serve 90% of your numbers, then you will not earn these 3 prior experience points. However, at 90%, you do have an opportunity to earn prior experience points for meeting your other objectives. So those are some things that we'll talk about as we begin looking at and continue looking at this form and the information that we're submitting for the annual performance report. You'll notice that part A is asking you how many participants were new. When we think about the participants that were new, we want to include here those students who were served for the first time by your program within this 2024-25 reporting period. So between September 1 of 24 to August 31st of 2025, how many of those were served for the first time? And number 2, the continuing participant will include all of those participants that you may have served last year or in prior reporting periods who may have been a returning student, and we're going to include them now in this continuing number, and were served also in 24-25, so within that same September to August reporting period. You'll notice that there's some quality control that gets into the web portal. So this is, again, all a form. We're just simply looking at it in paper form here. But there is some quality control in that the new plus a continuing should total the number you served. And so that's something that you want to look at carefully, again, because it's being determined whether you met your number and whether you will earn 3 points or not. Okay. Every one of these additional areas that we're reporting on in this demographic profile has that same built-in total numbers to allow you to account for every one of your students. Okay. Some things that the department also looks at is in section B with respect to compliance. Did you serve the regulatory number that you were funded to serve with respect to 2/3 being both first generation and low-income students? Again, there is no narrative, so they're simply taking your number. So B1, the number in B1, divided by A3, because we're thinking about numerators and denominators, who's being accounted for. So out of your total participants, how many were both first generation and low income to determine whether you were in compliance. Some things that are also important to note about both of these two immediate questions that we're responding to in the annual performance report is that we need to also ensure that we're looking at the regulations with respect to who are individuals that have been served, meaning that they are eligible, they're citizens, or you have the documentation to support that they are an eligible participant. And secondly, that these are individuals that are eligible because they're both first generation low income and or other. Okay, so we want to ensure also that within your documentation, as we described within that section 1, with respect to being, and providing the best information that's readily verifiable, is that these are individuals who received documented services. Okay, not just one service, but services. For EOC, when we consider the services that we provide for our participants, and for many of those who are EOC, we know that we serve EOC adults. So our primary target is to serve adults who are 19 and older. However, we also know that when we're serving our EOC participants, we can serve some individuals that are under age 19 if they are eligible and there is no talent search program that can serve them. We also know that we serve veterans and adults who have expressed an interest in post-secondary education. So we need to ensure that we're adhering to the regulations with respect to who were those participants that are eligible to be served in our EOC program. One question that we always get, and I think I'm going to go ahead and mention it now because the question that often comes up is how many of those participants can I serve that are under 19? And while there is no indication within the regulations that indicate that you have to serve a certain percentage and or can serve a certain percentage of individuals under age 19. What is referenced is that you will not serve those a high number of individuals under age 19 because we don't want to dilute the intent for which the EOC program was created, and that's to serve adults. I think if you ask any of the program or EOC program specialists, they often indicate you shouldn't exceed more than 10%. And so that's something that they often share. But I know that other programs and program directors have said, what do they feel is their percentage of where we are not diluting the intent of EOC? Okay, so do keep that in mind. Make sure you have your documentation again to support who are your participants that you're serving. The next few areas within this demographic profile are with respect to race and ethnicity. And you'll see that we'll account for, the participants and the information that they fill out on their intakes to indicate their race and or ethnicity and or indication that they're of two or more races. So you will respond accordingly. And again, most of you will use your program. So whether you're using LaCai or Blumen or Student Access, you'll use your data system to help capture these numbers. In section C, you'll notice that I have highlighted non-binary or another gender. And I've highlighted that because this is a potential change that we may see given the current administration. And we may see the removal of this number D3. However, I've highlighted as a cautionary because we really won't know until the APR website goes live. Okay? And for the majority, you'll need to make a decision whether you update your records based on the information that you have, or whether you just decide if they do remove that, whether you either put them into the male or female group or the unknown. But the key is that you still have to count for every individual. And you'll notice that each of these areas indicate that it must equal the value of A3, which represents the number that you served within the reporting period. You'll also notice that in section E, we're reporting on the students based on their grade level. And so we have some different ranges. And so again, your data system will help you respond to this breakdown of detail that's needed regarding age distribution. In section F, here you'll identify, and again, this is information that you capture from the participant intake, is how many participants had limited English proficiency. And you will insert that number there. In section G, we'll identify how many of those students were served within the reporting period by another federally funded program. You'll notice that I have highlighted Talent Search here. And I highlighted Talent Search here only as a precautionary measure, because identified within the TRIO regulations is that a participant cannot participate at the same time. So I'm going to repeat that, at the same time. The participant cannot be both in Talent Search and EOC. So I mentioned that here with some precautions. You also may want to look at your records, because oftentimes, within our TRIO community, we might work with a student who, for example, might be an Upward Bound graduate or even a Talent Search graduate, and they have now, been kind of handed off to EOC to continue to provide additional support services and or maybe even student support services. And so in those cases, really think about that number. If your data system is indicating that you had a Talent Search student, go back and look at your records. Was that student really served by both Talent Search and EOC at the same time? And if that is the case, then you'll want to maybe think twice about counting that number, because if you do, and they're served by both programs, then you are not in compliance. The other thing that you want to think about is some of our record keeping requirements, in that if your EOC participants are being served by another federally funded program and vice versa, then each of the programs is required to document the services that the other program is provided. So you do need to ensure that you have an understanding of what services those students are being provided if they are being served by another federally funded program. In section H, if you are an EOC program that indicated you were going to work with a particular target high school, and there's not very many of us EOC programs that did this. However, if you were one of those, then you would need to, within section H, identify the target schools. You would have identified within your grant application that you were serving target high schools and or even included potentially those in what we call the EOC profile. And so in the APR portal, if you did identify any schools, then, and your grant was approved as such, then you would see a listing of those target schools, and you would need to select the name of each of the schools, and you would need to update the number that were served within each of those target schools. So again, if you had to report on those last year, most likely it will be pre-populated in the APR web portal that you did work with particular target schools. In section I of this section 1, we also saw that we need to respond to the competitive preference priorities. The first part of the competitive preference priorities was addressing the project working with and providing academic support to military or veteran connected students. And so again, many of you would use your data system to provide the information on the number of veterans, active duty, spouses, or children of active duty military. And so you would provide those numbers within this table. The next part of the competitive preference priorities was that we were going to report on something regarding any activities that we may have engaged in, particular organizations that would help some of our EOC adults or participants obtain post-secondary credentials. And so here in responding to the second CPP, you would identify some of those projects. If you have that listing from last year's APR, you can also go ahead and take the list and just copy it from last year's annual performance report, and then just copy and paste it here, and then add additional projects as needed. The next part of this particular CPP was to respond to any activities that you highlighted within your logic model. And you would describe how some of these activities and how you continue to provide services to your EOC participants, describing how many, individuals, like what was your plan, how many of those participants, received this intervention. And again, every one of us was unique in how we described some of those interventions from our logic model that was informed by research to say these are activities that we feel very strongly about, in that if we engage our adults and our EOC participants, then they're more likely to succeed with respect to one of our objectives. So you would have to decide, what was one of those activities, and then describe, how you implemented it, what were some of those activities and the number of individuals who received those services. You'll notice that, and I've highlighted it, that the text box is 500 words or less. And I didn't even realize that there was an S in there rather than an X. But they want to know, but they really don't want to know, because they only give you 500 words to describe this. So again, what you may want to do is go back, take a look at what you did, what you may have reported last year, copy and paste, edit the numbers and edit the details, add some different things. But again, one thing I recommend is just go ahead and doing that in Word, where you can do a word count, and then just copy and paste that into here, so that you can ensure that you're doing and including a narrative that's 500 words or less. If you go one word over, it won't even allow you to save it. And so that's why I'm highly recommending that you put that into a Word document and then count your words and then copy and paste here as needed. So that's section one. Again, when we log into the APR website, we'll go to the tab section one and complete the information that's needed. We'll then go to section two. And in section two, again, we're just providing a numbers narrative where we're describing the educational status of our EOC participants. If you think about the next two sections, section 3 and section 4, and excuse me, but I think I said 2, but so for section 3, and if you think about section 3 and 4, this is going to provide the details that is going to be looked at for determining whether you met your goals and objectives. Section 2 was the numbers. Did you meet your number funded to serve and the 2/3 criteria? In section 3, we're identifying what we call the denominator. Who's going to be evaluated for particular objectives based on their educational status? You'll notice that we have two different areas that we're filling out in this section 3. Section A allows us to respond to the educational status of adults 19 and older. And then section B allows us to respond to those participants that our project may have served that are under age 19. And the total number in A10 plus the total number in B5 will account for our total number that we served that was presented in section 2 at number A3. So this total A10 plus B5 should total the number from A3 to account for the educational status of all of the participants that were served. You'll notice that as we begin looking at the educational status for all of our EOC participants, that some of the descriptors allow us to identify participants that either had a secondary school credential or did not. I'm going to jump to B first, and then we'll come back to A. The reason that I'm going to do this is because there's a smaller group in B, but we're looking at those individuals. And if we think holistically about this group that are identified in group B, is that the majority of those individuals are of secondary school age. And so many of those do not have a credential. And so they're going to be grouped with other individuals and our adults to identify who are those groups of individuals within this annual performance report that are seeking to either earn a secondary school credential, meaning a high school diploma, or a GED, or a high school equivalency. And so in group B, we're identifying all of those students who already don't have a diploma. So in B1, we're including our participants that are high school non-seniors. Those individuals who are in grades 9th through 11th. In group B, where B2, we're including those individuals, those high school seniors, or individuals that are in a GED program, for example, that are equivalent to a 12th grader. In B3, we're including those secondary school dropouts, or those individuals who are not in school. They're not in high school because they dropped out, and they're not older than 18. And then in group B4, we're including other participants who are not older than 18. So if you think about B4, if you're maybe, let's say, for example, you're an EOC program and you're working with an alternative high school where you're working with individuals who are under age 19 and they're in a GED program but not equivalent to the 12th grade level. That might be somebody, for example, that you might include in that B4 category. Okay? So the number of those students in B are being considered as individuals who do not yet have a high school diploma or a credential. Okay, let's go back and take a look at A1. And we're going to spend a little bit more time in looking at this particular group because we know that as in our EOC program, we work with a number of adults who have varying educational levels. And again, Some of those will have a credential or be near receiving a credential, and others may not even be near receiving a credential. Very much like those individuals that we thought about in the under 18 that don't yet have a credential, and they're not equivalent to a high school senior. So we'll also see that we have some opportunities to identify individuals who already have a credential, are already enrolled in college, are not yet enrolled in college, who are post-secondary dropouts. So again, we work with a wide range of adults who have varying educational levels. So let's go ahead and take a look at these options, okay? In A1, adults without a secondary school credential, enrolled as a high school senior or in an alternative education program equivalent to a high school senior. Okay, so in this group, I want to ensure that I'm looking at those adults. And the key words in this particular grouping is that they're equivalent to a high school senior. For my EOC program, I like to think about these, including those adults that by August 31st, they're on track to earning their GED program or their high school equivalency certificate. So those are the groups that I'm looking at that are 19 or older, and that I want to account for in that group. Okay. In NQ, adults without a secondary school credential. These are those individuals that I like to include that may or may not be in a GED program or high school equivalency program, or individuals, similar to my B4 individuals. They're not there. They just barely started their GED program. And I know that in my particular area, it might take 2 or 3 years before they earn their GED, because after all, they're adults and they're taking care of their family and working full time and have a lot of going on. So for most of these individuals, I'm anticipating it's going to take them more than this reporting period for them to earn their GED or any credentials. In N3, I'm accounting for any individuals that we assist in our EOC program that are high school graduates. They already have either a diploma or a GED or a high school equivalency certificate. They are not yet enrolled in post-secondary education. And so my goal is going to be working with them in assisting them with the college admissions, financial aid, any other academic support that they need, and helping out with all of those processes that we know are very important for our adults to get them enrolled in post-secondary education. In A4, post-secondary dropouts with a secondary school diploma or credential. So here, again, I'm working with any of my individuals, my adults within my target areas who dropped out. They were enrolled in a post-secondary program because they already had a diploma or a GED, already enrolled in college, but they have dropped out or stopped out. Okay, and so I want to account for those individuals in A4. In A5, a post-secondary dropout without a secondary school diploma or credential. This particular option allows EOC programs to account for those adults who might be in a post-secondary program, but because the institution or where they were enrolled allowed them to be enrolled, even though they didn't have a secondary school diploma or credential. And so I can account for those in A5. In A6, a post-secondary transfer. If I'm working with an individual who already has a credential, maybe somebody who already has a certificate and wants to pursue another certificate or an associate or a bachelor's degree, then those are individuals that I want to account for as a transfer. They're transferring from one institution to another to earn another credential. In A7, I can account for post-secondary students, because again, if I go back and I look at my regulations indicate that my EOC program can serve individuals who are already post-secondary students. And so in A7, I want to account for those here. In A8, other participants 19 or older. Our EOC programs work with individuals from all walks of life. And oftentimes we have individuals because of particular circumstances. I can't enroll in a GED. I know our program worked with a number of individuals who were incarcerated, and because of it either not being offered or we were providing resources and trying to support them in their educational efforts. Sometimes I can't include them in any of these other options. And so option A8 allows me to account for those individuals that just don't seem to fall into any of these other categories. A9 allows me to refer to some of my adults that I don't know what their educational status is. I've been working with this particular adult. We're providing some services to them, but we haven't tested them to find out where they really are. And either could decide to put them in A2 because they don't have a credential yet. But I may decide, I just don't have enough information through my assessment to be able to determine what their educational status is. So I may decide to include those individuals in A9. So having described now all of these groupings, we can see that we're accounting for all the educational status for all those participants that were served. What is important to note, though, that even though I have these options A8 and B4, in that even if I have identified one individual as an other participant, I have to provide a response to the department to let them know why I have indicated that I have these individuals identified as other participant. So you may want to go back and look at your records and say, why did I include that individual within this category? When we think about the various groupings of individuals and the educational level, I mentioned early on in identifying section 3 that the educational levels are used to help us identify denominators. So those individuals who are college ready, meaning, and I'm using it very loosely in terms of college ready, they have a credential, either it's a high school diploma or they have a high school equivalency or a GED. Those are the individuals that within my EOC program I think about. They are ready, and my focus is on getting them enrolled into college. And so those are the individuals that I'm going to be thinking about. How many of those did apply for admissions? How many applied for my financial aid, my second objective? And then eventually, depending on how I responded to a question that we'll look at here in a little bit, how many eventually enrolled in post-secondary education programs, okay? So I can see that already as I begin populating some of these numbers, those numbers are going to be aggregated to help come up with a denominator of who will be evaluated for each of our objectives. Let's go ahead and take a look at section 4. Again, section 3 is going to give us the denominator, and section 4 is going to give us the numerator. So who out of those individuals within our denominator actually met the intended outcome for each of our objectives? When we look at section 4, we can see that our first objective is secondary school diploma. And here, when we log into the APR website, our percentage is going to be pre-populated based on our profile and our grant app and our approved application. If we happen to meet this first objective, we will earn 3 prior experience points. Let's go ahead and read the objective so that we can have an understanding for what it is that we're responding to. This particular objective indicates that of the participants that were served within the reporting period, and we're specifically looking at those individuals who did not have a secondary school diploma. So when we were thinking about that section A, we identified a couple of groupings. We identified, first of all those individuals under age 18, but we also identified other groups in the grouping of adults. And so those were individuals that did not have a secondary school diploma at the time of first service. Okay, and so we need to look at time of first service, whether it was in September, October, or January, or March, the first time I provided service to them, if they, within this reporting period, if they did not have a secondary diploma or its equivalent, how many of those by August 31st, A1 receive a secondary school diploma or its equivalent? Okay. In A2, how many enrolled in a program but did not complete it? Because remember, if we're thinking about those groupings in section 3, we identified, for example, in A1, and I'm going to go ahead and go down here a little bit more too, so that you can see the denominator. And that's one of the things I really like about this, the instructions for the EOC APR is that they tell you this is who's being counted in the denominator. So when we looked at section 3 in A1, we talked about those adults who were in a GED program equivalent to a senior. In A2, we identified those adults that didn't have a GED. In A5, we included those adults who were in a post-secondary program that did not have a GED. And then, of course, B1, B2, B3, and B4 were all our under 18-year-olds. So all of those individuals form the denominator for this secondary school objective. You'll notice that at the latter part of that highlighted section in the denominator, we remove from the denominator any individuals or participants that we find became deceased. Okay, so any deceased participant does not impact the outcome of your objective. So here, again, in this section A, we'll identify what happened to all of those individuals that I accounted for in A1, A2, A5, plus B1, B2, B3, and B4, minus anybody who might have become deceased. What happened to them? How many received a diploma? How many of those enrolled in an alternative education program and didn't complete it? How many might have re-enrolled in high school? Because remember, we're looking also in the B category, individuals who, were secondary school dropouts. And in A4, how many were not enrolled? So here we're accounting for any of those individuals who might have, at the beginning when we first served them in the reporting period, might have been in high school and now are no longer enrolled. And so we can account for those in A4. And then in A5, we'll account for the number that are deceased. And then, of course, the number A6, unknown. I just don't know. I don't have enough information to let me know what happened to those individuals. In evaluating this particular objective, the value that we enter into A1 divided by A7 is going to give us the percentage that is going to be measured against our approved objective. If we meet or exceed that percentage, then again, we will earn 3 prior experience points. Let's go to objective 2, which is our financial aid applications. Here, similar to the prior objective, we've identified who our denominator is. So we're looking at, in section 3, those in A1, adults who were in a GED program equivalent to a high school senior. We're looking at those individuals in A3 that we indicated already have a credential, a diploma, or a GED or high school equivalency. In A4, we're looking at the post-secondary dropouts. In A6, we're looking at the transfer students. And then in B2, we're looking at those high school seniors that were equivalent to a high school senior. So these are all individuals that, if we look at the objective itself, indicates those participants that were served that were not already in a GED, were not already in a post-secondary program, and included those high school seniors or those equivalents, high school graduates, or individuals who had already obtained a high school equivalency credential. So again, those are all those individuals in A1, A3, A4, A6, and B2. And so now, out of that group, that denominator, they want to know how many of those individuals completed a financial aid application. And so we would use again our data system to say how many of those students actually applied for financial aid and how many did not, and how many of them are unknown. We don't know whether they actually completed a financial aid application. What is important also to note about this particular objective financial aid application is that they're not strictly looking at the FAFSA. So you also will get credit if the students applied for a loan, if they applied for a scholarship application, anything that you documentation wise that you're able to obtain that help the students financially with respect to paying for their post-secondary education can be included in as completed financial aid application. Read this carefully as that's noted within the instructions. And of course, once the instructions get posted onto the APR website. Let's go ahead and go to the third objective. The third objective is post-secondary education admissions. We're looking at the same denominator as we did for the financial aid objective. So you'll see that we're accounting for those individuals in A1, A3, A4, A6, and B2. And how many of those actually applied for admissions to a post-secondary education program. Again, these are all individuals who are high school equivalent to seniors or had already a credential. What is important to note about this particular objective is that the post-secondary admissions is the actual admissions application. Okay, so they've completed the submission of that admissions application. We're not considering here any participants who received counseling, advising on how to complete the college admissions application, or somebody you may have given an application waiver to. These are strictly individuals who did complete the admissions process for post-secondary education. Again, the C1, the number that applied, divided by the total number of individuals in the denominator, if that percent meets or exceeds your approved objective, then you will earn 2 prior experience points. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at the last objective. The last objective is post-secondary enrollment. And you can see that this particular objective is heavily weighted with respect to prior experience points. Here you'll earn 5 points if you meet your approved objective. This particular objective allows us to consider again a denominator and a numerator, and it looks at 2 different sections of this denominator. The first part of it is if you look at options D1 and D2, allows you to look at your participants who earned credentials and or who had credentials. Okay, so option D1 allows you to look at those individuals that you served within the reporting period that received a secondary school diploma. So if we think about this first objective that we filled in, option A1 from that first objective said how many of those individuals that did not have a secondary school diploma or a credential earned it during the reporting period. And so we responded to that in that first objective. This particular number now wants to know, out of that number that you provided in section 4A1, how many of those individuals enrolled in a post-secondary education program? The D2 option now allows us to look at all of the other individuals. So those individuals that we identified in A3, college ready, already had a credential, the post-secondary dropouts, and the post-secondary transfers. Out of those individuals that you could have potentially, because they already had a credential, how many of those enrolled in post-secondary education? And you would report that in D2. For the other individuals that did not enroll in post-secondary education, you'll notice that you have some options to include those they did not enroll in post-secondary education, or they became deceased, or it's unknown. one thing that is really important as you begin looking at your data system is that you need to ensure that the total number you're reporting on here and accounting for enrolling in post-secondary education could equal the sum of section 4A1, so those that we indicated earned a credential, and the total that we've reported in A3, A4, and A6. Okay. Now, with respect to evaluating prior experience points, this is based off of a response that we had to respond to in the 21-22 annual performance report. And in the 21-22 annual performance report, there was a little bit of confusion, I might say it that way, in terms of how some of our EOC projects, how we interpreted who was going to be evaluated for enrolling in post-secondary education. And so this is why we have those two options, D1 and D2, to allow us to respond to the option that we selected for evaluation. So let's go ahead and look at those options, and those decisions were already made back in 21-22. The decision that was made back in 21-22 will stand today when you submit this annual performance report. So the question that we were asked in 21-22 was, who is it that you're reporting on as enrolling in post-secondary education? Okay. And so when this decision was made, you were making it for the entire grant cycle and not just for that reporting year. Okay, so that's why it stands throughout this entire grant cycle. So those options. Option 1 is that an EOC project selected option 1 if they indicated, I'm going to base my post-secondary enrollment objective based on the number of participants that earned the credential during the reporting period. And that's who I'm going to indicate, did they enroll in college? Okay, so my denominator, if I selected option 1, is going to be the number of participants that earned a credential. So whoever I reported on in section 4A1. If, for example, I said 150 of them earned a credential, then now my numerator is going to be whatever I reported in D1. So if in my example, 150 of those individuals earned a credential and a high school diploma or a equivalency, it was 150. And now if in D1, let's say, for example, that I indicate 130 of those 150 enrolled in college, then 130 divided by 150 is 87%. And so if that meets or exceeds my approved objective, then I would earn prior experience points because I selected option 1. Okay, so I would earn my 5 points. However, additional EOC projects interpreted this post-secondary enrollment objective differently and said, okay, I'm not only going to count those individuals who earned a credential during the reporting period, but I'm also going to count for those college-ready individuals, those individuals that already had a credential. And so in the second option, the denominator became not only those that earned the credential, but everybody in A3, A4, and A6. And so I had a much larger number of individuals who could have enrolled in post-secondary education. And so in order to determine the outcome for this particular objective, my denominator would be the D6, meaning everybody who earned a credential, plus the A3, A4, and A6. And the numerator would be the number that I put in D1 plus the number that I put in D2. And so the sum of D1 plus D2 divided by the value in D6 would give me the outcome for my option 2 selection. If I met or exceeded the particular objective, the pre-approved objective, then I would earn 5 prior experience points. Okay, so this is why this section D is a little bit more complicated, but for many of you, again, you have your data systems that are helping you and providing you with that information based on information you input into your database to say how many of those individuals who didn't have a credential earned a credential and eventually enrolled in college, plus how many of those individuals who already had a credential and enrolled in college, so that I can arrive at either of the options that I've selected for this addressing this particular objective. Okay. A little bit more complicated than the others because we're now combining the two groups of individuals, those who didn't have a credential and earned it, plus those who already had a credential and enrolled in post-secondary ed for both those. Okay, so the last part of the annual performance report is based on my response, the sum of, D1 plus D2, and how many of those individuals enrolled by type of post-secondary institution. So we would want to account for all of those individuals and indicate, did they go to a public or a private 2-year or 4-year, a proprietary school, a vocational skill, or a type of institution that it's unknown. I don't know what type, of institution that is. But we have to account for all of the individuals that we've reported on enrolling in post-secondary education. So in a nutshell, that's the annual performance report. Again, the template that we're using that's going to help us fill out a web form based, in the portal, in the annual performance report portal, which hopefully we'll have access to, once the government shutdown ends and communication opens up between the Department of Education and the contractor who is maintaining this web portal. Because again, we need to ensure that we have permissions. Because after we have filled out all of these sections, sections 1, 2, 3, and 4, the very last option that we're going to have is to submit the APR. It will go through some quality control to make sure, again, that all the numbers are totaling, that you have responded to the competitive preference priorities in each of the sections. And then you'll have an opportunity. It'll say sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. It'll kind of give you a little green light to say, okay, here's your APR. You click on go next, to go to the next screen. And it says, okay, all of these sections, if you get the green on every one of those sections, then you'll have an opportunity to preview. And I highly recommend that you do this, is that before you even submit the annual performance report, that you preview a PDF document that's going to show you the summary of everything that you have input into the annual performance report. And go to those pages. There's a number of pages within this document, this PDF, but embedded within that PDF is your prior experience points. Go back and take a look at it. Is it giving you the prior experience points that you have earned? If it doesn't, and it doesn't, and it's not reconciling with what you downloaded from your APR, your database, then I would go back and take a look at it. You can exit the web portal and review your data and then come back in and begin again by looking at each of those sections and checking your numbers, editing them as needed, and then previewing again your PDF to say, okay, am I now earning all of those prior experience points? If I am, and I feel confident now that this is what I want to submit, then I can click on the submit button. Once you click on the submit button, it's going to take you to an additional page that now has the signatures, the digital signatures, and the acknowledgement by the director that the APR has been submitted. You can again download the final annual performance report. And within this particular screen, you'll be able to check mark the directors to say, I certify, again, to the best of my knowledge, that the information is true and correct, and it's very readily verifiable. And then there's an approve button at the bottom where you click on approve, and that submits the annual performance report. Once that annual performance report is submitted, it will go and send a message to the certifying official that the APR has been submitted. The certifying official must sign the APR by going again to the trio.ed.gov website, logging in, and then logging in through login.gov. They will end up at the same place where the certification is required. So they'll end up at the same site that says check mark, that it's certifying it, and then click on approve. That must be completed within 2 days. So please read the instructions carefully. We had heard a couple years ago that they were going to give, because last year we had 5 days after the director signed to submit the annual performance report and for this certifying official to sign digitally. But we've heard that it could potentially go down to 2 days, and or that it was eventually going to be that it needed an immediate response with the respective certifying official. Okay, so with that, you will have completed and submitted the annual performance report. Okay, Lisa, is there anything that you'd like to add and are questions that we still need to respond to?
We had a few questions and I responded to them. One recent one was about the option choice here for the very option 1 or 2. And once you make a selection, at the first year, your first funding cycle on that APR, then you're bound to that option, correct, until the next funding cycle?
Yes, until the next funding cycle. You had to stay, you had that choice, but it was for the entire grant cycle.
Fun, right? So
yeah.
you can't switch it until the next funding cycle. And then another question was, if we have participants that were served in a previous year, and then they return for this year, they would be considered a continuing participant, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Even if they stay out a year,
Even
sometimes
if they stay out of here. Yep.
they can come back as
They could have
continuing.
stayed out 1 or more years, as long as they were served. And remember, we're talking about that you have documented services that were provided to them within the reporting period.
Great. Okay. And then we have, aside from the certifying on the application that a participant is a resident or citizen, are we required to get any other proof? And I said, federally speaking, no, but you need to make sure you check in with your agency or institution because they could have, and quite recently, set up additional documentation requirements that are local. I don't know, there's been talk, but we haven't received any official notification from the department stating that it's a federal requirement as well.
So something that you do want to think about within the regulations for any TRIO student, they have to be an eligible citizen or permanent resident or an individual that has provided documentation from Department of Homeland Security to indicate that they have an intent to become a permanent resident. That was the trickier one, right? Because we can often get, the student identifies on the intake, I am a citizen. Or if they indicate they're a permanent resident, I know for us, we say, well, we need a copy of a valid permanent resident card. And I say valid because sometimes they'll say, well, it's expired. So they're not eligible because it's not valid because, the date has expired. And then for the last one that we really struggle with, I mean, the other one is for individuals within the Marshall Islands, all the criteria, for the, but that one criteria for Department of Homeland Security, that one I know is a little bit tougher to get, but you need something. We ask our participants to give us a copy of their application that when somebody has applied to become a permanent resident, they have to submit the application. They will get a letter back from Department of Homeland Security to indicate that this individual has applied for permanent residency. That's what you need, okay? Because now they have met the intent of becoming a permanent resident. For EOC, I think also one thing that I want to mention that's often a challenge is that, just given the different target communities that we're working with, is that, we'll have students who are DACA students, students who are an asylum. And these individuals, because they are temporary, the DACA is temporary in nature, they are not eligible because of the temporary status. Anybody in a protected temporary status is not eligible. Okay. Individuals who were asylum seekers, and I don't know, and I think it's because of how complicated that process is, right? But essentially, someone who is granted asylum is here, right? They've been granted asylum, they have permission to be and reside in the US, but that does not mean that they are residents, okay? And or yet have an intent to become a permanent resident, because an asylum seeker must be here for a specific number of years. And after those specific number have an opportunity to apply for permanent residency. So they have to apply for permanent residency, the asylum seekers before, and you have to have the documentation to show that they have applied to be with, again, intent to become a permanent resident. Okay. So again, I get it. It's something very common that we face in our EOC program because of the communities that we're in. So.
Right. It is definitely an issue.
Mhm,
So great question. I also wanted just to clarify some stuff or just to reiterate some items that I've been putting on the side in the chat, since we didn't have too many questions. So I was like coming up with APR tips as you were presenting. And I wanted just to bounce back off of you, Lourdes, that, what we tried to do for section 2 and 3, since section 2, could you scroll back up to section 2? Section 2,
Oh, did I?
graphics of our students, right? And section 3 relates to the standing or grade level of our students. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are 2 bits of information that you should be getting immediately from at the point of selection when students are applying, because you ask them, some questions dealing with, age, gender, and then, section 3 focuses on, well, what is your academic standing? And so that information in a perfect world is gathered upon entry and then updated or double checked when a continuing student comes back, because maybe the continuing student, their academic standing could have changed. Doesn't mean it will change like it does with the programs. When someone's in 7th grade, now they're in 8th grade. It doesn't work that way with EOC.
Yeah.
So back as a continuing participant, you want to double check, well, what their status is. Did it stay the same? Did they switch into another one of these categories under A or B? But section 2 and 3, to me, Lourdes, is something that should be updated in real time. And if today in your database for 25-26, you have 250 students in there, then section 2 and 3 should be equaling up to 250. You should wait until the end of the year, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And so I think one thing that's really important within this particular section 3 is you're saying at the time of first service in the reporting period. And so that's why I mentioned at the time that I served them. I don't always serve them all on September 1. I served them on some in October. I've served them in first time in December, in January, in March. But at that time, you were doing your evaluation, your assessment of their educational status. And so that's helping you, whatever forms you have in place, you're assessing where they are at so that you can report them here within this particular category. And a great example, that you were referring to, Lisa, is that maybe last year in 23-24, they were college ready and I helped them get into college. And now in 24-25, they're a post-secondary continuing student. They came back, they're wanting to do further assessments, they're wanting to help assistance with financial aid. They're still trying to figure out that path, and you're doing all different kinds of services for them. And additional resources with financing, right? The college experience. So their educational status might have changed from one year to the next. And so again, but you're doing that. You're doing your due diligence through your assessment processes to determine what's their educational status on this first date that I'm serving them within the 24-25 reporting period. Okay.
So I love that example you gave because that
Yeah.
happens a lot, you know,
Yeah.
folks work with students as 12th graders or
Mhm.
GE graduates, and they help get them
Mhm.
in college. And because you kind of bond with them, or they remember
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
come back. And the
Mhm.
love about EOC, y'all, is that
Mhm.
they come back or they start brand new with you as
Mhm.
somebody who's already in college. What I love
Mhm.
about EOC is that you still get credit on section
Mhm.
two,
Yes.
3 for helping somebody that from the very
Mhm.
beginning of that reporting period is already in
Mhm.
college. And
Yeah.
the beauty of it, you know, you help them with their
Mhm.
you give them some financial literacy information. That's 2 services there. That's it, Lourdes. They don't come
Yeah.
up again in section 4 because they
Mhm.
don't
Yeah.
pay for the objectives.
No, no, and that's a great point. Because just to reiterate that, Lisa, is again, when we were going through and we were looking at these objectives and who forms the denominator and who forms the numerator, is that we saw that there are individuals, who don't get counted towards an objective. Those post-secondary students, those adult unknowns, they don't get counted towards you know the the objectives. They're not in the denominator, but they do help you meet your numbers. And so
Mhm.
that student who may have returned that you helped in college last year, they're helping you in the numbers this year. And especially if they're both first generation low income, they're helping you meet that 2/3 criteria. And so you're just continuing to provide services for them. We don't have to continue tracking them, but and I love EOC because we bond with them, right? That we continue providing services to them. Um,
Year
yeah.
after year after year,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm
Yeah.
doing it out of the goodness of my heart, or I want to do it.
Yeah.
Books, you can actually get credit for it towards
Mm-hmm.
your numbers, towards your
Mm-hmm.
section 2, 3, towards
Uh-huh.
your ability, you know, the 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
That counts toward that. And like added value to it is that, oh,
Mm-hmm.
and then I don't have to worry about them for
Yeah.
section 6. They don't fit in section 4. No matter how you
Mm-hmm.
try to make them fit, they're not
Mm-hmm.
asking for them. So although
Yeah.
you may have an APR or
Mm-hmm.
you may be serving 1,500, 850 to
Mm-hmm.
1,900 participants, I don't know if you ever
Mm-hmm.
realize that when you get to section 4, you're not actually adding up numbers to equal the number that you probably ended up having to serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, it's not an
Yeah.
exact perfect mix. I mean, it could be, but it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be.
Mm-hmm.
So keep
Yep.
that in mind.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, that all your numbers should total. The APR web tool is helping you, keep track. Plus, you're using your data systems, that have those, already help you. So you could just take your report from from your Bloomin database or from your student access or Lokai and just say, okay, I'm just really now populating these and ensuring that everybody's accounted for. Again, just as we're looking at this section 3, just remember though, that if you have anybody in A8 or B4, you're going to have to, a quick narrative will pop up and say, okay, why, do you are, and who are you accounting for? Help us understand who you're
Who are
including
these
here.
people?
And I just have something short and sweet. These are individuals that, it includes, for example, my incarcerated individuals, and they can't perceive, they can't, yes, they don't have a credential. However, they're not somebody with respect to my objectives that I'm able to help them enroll in a credential program. Or
Eligible.
I have a group of individuals that, we've not been fully, because they're incarcerated, to determine what educational level they are at.
Mhm.
And so I just short and sweet,
Right.
um,
If they
you
read it
know,
at all, right? Sometimes we joke
mhm,
that
yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
they read this, but
yeah, we don't know.
it's stuck. It's
Mhm,
pops up to do that. Before I
yeah.
forget, I want to let you know that I do have a visual representation, Lourdes, and I'm going to put it in the Google Drive for this session, where it kind of helps make the connection between what participants are at the beginning of each year status wise in section
Mhm,
3
mhm,
and which objective, if any, they will be accounted for in section 4.
mhm,
So it's a visual with color coding, and that's the way
mhm,
sometimes I have to look at it too, is
mhm, yeah.
waiting to say, okay, that student does
Mhm,
count, doesn't count. I can read it, but I love a
Yeah.
graphic representation. So I forget
Yeah,
who I
I
got it
agree.
from. It's
Yeah.
been very helpful. I'm going to upload it in the Google Drive to help
Yeah.
you see
Yeah,
that.
that's a very helpful tool because I mean, if you look at it, you can say, okay, which is kind of like the path they can take, right?
And,
In
and
terms of how
sometimes,
they're being accounted for.
sometimes it
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. So you
Hmm.
memorize it. And then
Hmm.
all of a sudden, oh, that makes sense now. How could I not
Yeah.
like the back of my hand? It makes perfect sense now. Because at the
Hmm.
time, there was a lot of stuff going on. And sometimes we have to
Hmm.
memorize
Yeah.
things, color coding, and then
Hmm.
realize, oh, I don't need the color code anymore. I could just, but some of us
Yeah.
have to, it takes a,
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it wonderful to keep with your policies and procedures manuals, right? And to help
yes,
you.
yes.
And it's
And
when you're training new individuals. So,
great
yeah.
training for new staff and existing staff as to at the beginning of every year, this is why
Mhm.
it matters and why
Mhm.
it's so critical to, as fast as you can, to
Mhm.
basically, I hate, classify, you must at the beginning of every
Mhm.
put people in their lane, in their
Mhm.
standing lane, because
Mhm.
it does give you a heads up as to what they should be receiving service wise that may
Mhm.
not be directly related to an objective. So if you know on
Mhm.
an individual basis what path that particular person should be taking based on their academic standing, it
Mhm.
helps with all the
Mhm.
madness of everything going on. We have
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Lourdes, do you mind taking folks briefly through the instructions? Because there's a lot of great stuff,
Mhm.
just for APR, but regulatory
Mhm.
minders,
Mhm.
especially, that this instructions document is a really powerful tool that y'all should
Mhm. Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and it's always good to read that because there's a lot of definitions, right? And sometimes
Yes.
you're like, well, who are they referring to? And and so you will have, and and it's also a great point that that right now Lisa's providing these for you because if you go out to the web portal, we know the APR site is um being updated, and so a lot of information is not yet being found. Lisa, can you see those okay?
I don't see it yet. You can share it if you want to share it, but
Let
I
me go
just want
back.
to point out that the
Let me
main
go
reason
back.
why we have these instructions edited
Hmm.
is Lourdes. She
Hmm.
updated them as much as she could with
Hmm.
the Reddit years. She's using 23, 24, and she's gone through and
Hmm.
update them as much as possible. So kudos back to you because
Hmm.
you're the one that had them and updated them. And here are the instructions. I tell you
Hmm.
what, there's how many pages? It's 18 pages. It's some
18 pages. Hmm.
they do a really good job about answering the majority of any kind of combination of questions. Um,
Hmm.
but hold on to it because it does has definitions and it's a really good training tool
Hmm.
for folks that are onboarding on how identification,
Hmm.
selection, and the serving of participants. If you understand these categories here that they tell you a definition, that's a
Hmm.
big
Hmm. Yeah. Probably the other thing, definitely download these instructions and the form, as guidance. But as soon as the APR website goes live, then download, just I mentioned a couple of areas of the gender where we might see some changes. But for the most part, it should remain the same. Again, no changes in the Higher Education Act. No, I don't believe there's going to be any real major changes.
no.
And, keep monitoring the trio.ed.gov website so that we can see when those APR website, when those, the site will go live and when those APRs will be due. And again, when it goes live, if you need to update the director, get permissions. Um, if you need to get certifying official, there are forms within the portal itself that will allow you to say, I need for these individuals to have permission, but keep in mind that it is not the contractors who is giving you permission. What the contractor does is simply you fill out the form online. That sends it to the contractor, but the contractor has to relay that information to your program specialist to say, do you give this person permission to access the APR website? Okay, so that's why you want to do that immediately. If you're not ready yet to submit the APR, at least do those processes. Certify who your official is. your certifying official is. Set up your credentials, set up the permissions for your data entry users needed, and then you can wait, for as much time, but make sure you get it in before the deadline. But then you can log back in and get that APR submitted. So, because the only thing that really happens is if you haven't submitted your APR within like 2 weeks after you've logged in, you'll just start getting reminder messages. Hey, we haven't seen your APR yet. We haven't seen your APR yet. But you just kind of take it with a grain of salt and say, I'm still working on it, but I'm aware of it, and acknowledge that.
So
Do those, get that done. Just, we don't want you to have to wait till the very end, because oftentimes those processes with the permissions, and especially the government shutdown, we don't know what's happening with the department. Some people were gone, and we don't know whether our program specialists are still even there.
Right.
And so you want to get that done, get those permissions. You don't want to wait till the very end and then find out it's taken 2 or 3 weeks for the contractor to get your permissions set up. Okay.
So you want to hurry up and
Mhm.
get it done, and
Yeah.
then wait on the APR website to become live, but you're going to get it done, and then concentrate on 25, 26 and trying to see how quickly you can update your section 2 and 3 for the 25, 26 APR by going back now. If you haven't already, if the numbers are not adding up, go ahead and make that add up. So you only have to worry about section 4. Okay. Lourdes,
Yeah.
thank you so much
Oh,
for everything.
lastly, Lisa, the one thing, folks, you want to do is download that PDF, your prior experience reports, and keep that on file in a secure location, and or where if you're leaving and you have a new director, you want those individuals to have access to those, because if you ever have to argue your prior experience points, that's the only document that you have. Your program specialist will not give it to you. The contractor will not give it to you in the future if you ever lose those. Okay. So save those in a network folder where other folks can access them.
And
Okay.
also try to bump it up to grants and contract, or some other department on campus
Mhm,
will remain there, even if we come and go, that they will have
mhm,
access to that because they'll need it. Lourdes, thank you so
mhm.
much for everything, as
Uh-huh.
always.
Yeah.
Everyone out there for joining us. Thank you, Donna and Leah, for keeping
Mhm,
on task. And y'all have a great rest of your week. Don't forget, if you need
mhm,
additional information or assistance working on your APR, NEC is
mhm,
available, ready to
mhm.
go. So check out our website and get us working for you. Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks again. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Donna and Leo,
Thank you,
for allowing
Lourdes.
me to join you.
Of course.
Everyone,
Thanks.
have a wonderful day.
Bye. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.